Hello, welcome to Bits in Biology. I'm Liz, and today we're going to take a look at genotype. And along the way, we're going to learn a bit about a monk named Gregor Mendel and what he did to earn the title of Father of Genetics. Genotype is a 1 to 5 player game designed by John Covey, Paul Solomon, and Ian Zhang. It was published by Genius Games in 2021 and plays in about 45 to 90 minutes. In Genotype, you play as a researcher who is following in the footsteps of Gregor Mendel, a 19th century Augustinian monk who studied pea plants in order to figure out how traits were passed down from parents to offspring. During the game, players have a garden of pea plant cards that show a set of 2 to 4 traits, such as purple flowers and short stems, that they then must validate each of those traits in order to score points. Each round, dice are going to be rolled to represent the outcomes of breeding different parent plants. After the dice are rolled, players will take turn drafting the dice, and that's going to allow them to validate the traits on their pea plants, and that's what earns you points. The fun part about this game is deciding how to use your limited actions to influence the outcome of the dice rolls and dice drafting so that you can validate your pea plants faster than your opponents. It's basically an efficiency puzzle, and well, I really enjoy efficiency puzzles, so if you do too, this might be the game for you. It's also a very beautiful game. The artwork was done by Tomasz Borgusz and Amelia Sales. And you can see, for instance, on some of these pea plant cards, these are the ones that are going to be planted in your garden. So on this pea plant card, you can see the phenotype shown in the picture, quite beautiful with purple flowers, and we have smooth seeds here. The letters that you see along that right-hand side are representing the genotype of the plant, the underlying genetic variants that this plant has that give rise to the phenotype, what you see when you look at the plant. Other cards that are in this game are the tool cards. You can see that those are very well done too. This is a grant that will earn you some money. Very hard to come by in this game. A dissertation that will allow you to set research goals for a little less cost. Here's a seed bag. This will allow you to get plants a little faster. And some of my favorites actually are the assistant cards. So let's take a look at some of those. Here we have Father Omari, who's going to give you another worker placement spot during one of the phases. Here we have Sister May, who's going to let you validate your traits just a bit faster. And here we have Brother Alypius, who's going to let you draw an extra card during the gardening action. There are a total, I think, of 10 different assistants. The artwork is quite beautiful. The back of these cards is actually quite nice. So on the back of these cards here, you can see a lovely picture of the abbey where Gregor Mendel worked. And so I'll show you I'll take a picture of it and insert it here of the back of this board, but the back of this board is just gorgeous as well, which is great, but a shame that you hardly ever get to see it. So that's very well done. The lettering, absolutely beautiful. Player mats, also quite beautiful, well done. It is worth noting that I have a deluxe version of this game that I got off Kickstarter because, well, when I saw the theme, I just had to order this one, and very pleased that it turns out to be quite a fun game as well. So let's take a look at how it plays. So like I said before, in Genotype, players have a garden of pea plants with different traits on them. They have as you can see here, between 4 and 2 different traits. And the goal of the game is to validate the traits on your pea plants by taking dice that match the traits on each plant. When each trait is validated, you're going to take one of these trait markers and cover up whatever trait it was that you validated. Once all of the traits of a plant have been validated, so they're all covered up with these trait markers. Once all of those traits have been validated, then you will have an opportunity to harvest this plant, and then you can earn the points shown in the top left corner of the plant there. The game is played over 5 rounds. Each round consists of 3 phases. There is a working phase where players will place action markers in various spots on the board or on the player mat in order to accomplish tasks that will further your research. The second phase is the plant breeding phase, where we will roll all 20 of these beautiful dice, and then players will take turns choosing dice to validate traits on their pea plants. The third and final phase of each round is the research upgrade phase, where players get to spend coins to expand their research capacity, and that's focused up here in the top right side of the board. After 5 rounds, you'll total the points that have been earned from your pea plants and also from unspent coins, and the player with the most points is the winner. So let's take a look at how the game is set up and how each phase is played in a little more detail. So in setting up a game of Genotype, you are going to first put 1 coin next to each of these Punnett squares. So you'll have 4 coins on the board. And again, this is a deluxe copy of the game. In a retail copy, these would be cardboard coins, but they're still quite nice quality. So you're not losing out by getting a retail version of the game. The next thing that you will do is you will take the 4 abacus markers. So see these markers here, and you're going to place them on each of these darker spots on the abacus. This abacus is showing you the prices for each of the things listed along the left-hand side of the abacus here. So we'll go into more detail about that when I talk about the research upgrade phase. Then you will take 2 action markers. These are the action markers, these nice trowels. I think in the retail version, they're still wooden, but they just look like that without the screen printing on them. So you'll take 2 of these action markers for each player color. We're going to be setting up for a solo game, so we have 2 different colors represented here, and you're going to place those next to the abacus because these are things that you can purchase. Action marker here, you can purchase that during the research upgrades phase. Next thing you'll do is lay out nursery cards according to how many players. It's a different number according to how many players you have. So in a 1 to 2 player game, there are 3 cards that are laid out. In a 3 player game, you would lay out a 4th card like so. And in a 4 or 5 player game, you would lay out a 5th card here. And next we will go to the tool shed and lay out cards in the tool shed. Again, in a 1 to 2 player game, you'll lay out 3 cards. In a 3 player game, you'll lay out 4 cards, and in a 4 or 5 player game, you will lay out 5 cards. Then we'll come up here to the assistants and lay out 3 assistants, and the number of assistants is the same regardless of the number of players. Then you also want to make sure that the round marker is on the 1 on the round track up here in the top right corner of the game. To set each player up, you will deal each player 3 of these pea plant cards. Each player will then choose 1 pea plant to plant in their garden. They will choose 1 pea plant to hold in reserve, and they will discard 1 of those pea plants. You'll also deal each player a tool, randomly deal each player a tool that they will start the game with. Everybody starts with 3 action markers and 3 of these research goal markers, and everybody starts with a single coin. You determine who the first player is, give them the first player marker. Nearby, you're going to want to have your your trait markers and your coins. You're also going to have a stack of these extra plots, and you'll have also near the board these extra dice slots. So that sets up each player. They, of course, each have a player board. If you're setting up for a solo game, you'll also have the solo automa deck, the solo automa named Johann. You'll have the dice nearby the board and these parent genotype markers. So let's take a look at the different components before we go into the details of the game. We've already taken a look at the pea plant cards in a little bit of detail, so you're familiar with those now. These tools are one-time use cards that you can use to help you speed up your research. Let's come over here to these parent genotypes. So again, these are Punnett squares here. Each of these little flags on the outside of the Punnett square, each one represents a different parent, so 2 parents. And then in the middle, in the squares in the middle is representing the offspring that result from that pairing. And I forgot to mention earlier the traits that we're looking at. So we have seed shape, flower color, pod color, and plant height. So each one of these is double-sided. They'll have 2 small letters on one side and 2 capital letters on the other side. If you recall back from high school biology, looking at these genotypes here on the board, if we have big R, that big R is representing the dominant allele, the dominant gene variant, that in this case will give the offspring round seeds. Even if they have just one copy of that big R, they will have round seeds. That's where it gets its name, dominant. In fact, Mendel is the one that named those dominant. He didn't know he was dealing with genes. He, of course, was working in the mid to late 1800s, and we had no idea about DNA or genes or anything. That was yet to come. Okay, so back to where we were. The little r is showing you that that is a recessive trait, and you will get wrinkled P's with that genotype. And so what you can do with these parent genotypes, there's one that's horizontal and one that's vertical. And that's because you have your horizontal parent up here at the top. We could set this during the action phase, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, so that the parent was big R instead of big R, right? Or we could set one of the parents to be little r. In this way, you'll be able to manipulate the potential offspring genotypes that will be available. This is going to potentially allow you to validate your plants faster than your opponents. So you have a set of these for each of the Punnett squares. And I think that covers all of the different components of the game. So let's take a look now how each of the 3 phases of each round play out. The first phase is called the working phase. This is where players start with their 3 action markers at the start of the game. You'll have an opportunity during the 3rd phase of the game to purchase additional action markers, but you only start with 3. So that's why I said in the beginning that this is a bit of an efficiency puzzle, because you have to figure out how best to use your action markers to further your research goals. There are 10 possible actions you can do, and players will take turns, starting with the person with the first player marker. Players will take turns placing their action markers on the different worker placement spots. So let's take a look at what those are. Let's start with how you get pea plants in the first place. You can take the nursery action, which will allow you to choose 2 pea plant cards, either from the face-up cards that are available, or you can draw off the deck and you get what you get. You could also go to the tool shed here and choose one of these face-up tool cards. You can only draw from the face-up tool cards. You cannot draw from the deck randomly. So that takes care of getting more pea plants and getting tools. You could also come up here to the treasury and get some coins. So get 2 coins for coming up to the treasury. And I forgot to point out before, the number of, for some of these action spaces, the number of spaces that are available during the game will vary depending on how many players there are. So for instance, in the nursery, there are always 2 spaces, but in a 4 or 5 player game, we now get a 3rd space. Likewise, in the tool shed, there is always 1 space available, but in a 4 or 5 player game, a 2nd spot opens up here. And also in the treasury, there is always 1 space available, and in a 4 or 5 player game, a 2nd spot will open up. So we have gotten pea plants, we've gotten tools, we got some money at the treasury. Let's come over to the left side of the board now and take a look at how we can influence what happens in the 2nd phase of each round. One of the actions you can do is to place your player marker next to one of the 4 Punnett squares, and that is going to allow you to take one of these 2 parent genotype markers. You get to choose which one and which side, and you can place that on here to influence the possible offspring during the 2nd phase, the plant breeding phase. Or if there's already a marker in place, you can place your marker there to remove it, because sometimes those are not what you want to be there. So you can do one of either of those. You can either remove 1 marker or you can place 1 marker. Another thing you might do on this left side of the board to influence what happens in the 2nd phase of the game is to choose one of these first shift spots. So you can see here for each trait there is 1 worker placement spot labeled first shift. And so you can put your marker there, and what that's going to allow you to do is be the first person to choose from the dice that are out here. So let's say that we had, let's put some dice out here. So we're placing the dice, and we'll see this in more detail in the second phase of the game, but we're placing the dice according to the genotype that matches the face of the die according to the Punnett square. So that's going to change if you're setting a parent genotype to change that. So for instance, if the Punnett square looks like this, let's go back to if we had put our player marker here. If the Punnett square had looked like this originally, this is how the dice would be laid out in the second phase. But what happens if we had set the parent genotype like that? Well, now 1 and 2 are both big R, and 3 and 4 are both big R, little r. So that comes over there. So you can influence what happens in the second phase of the game. Okay, so let's come back here to the first shift. If you took that action, you would be able to have first choice of any one of these dice in the second phase of the game. Now notice there's only one worker placement spot for that choice. So only one person will be able to do that. If that spot's already taken, maybe you come down here to the second shift spot, and this allows you, after each player has taken a first shift action, to then have second choice of the dice that are out here. And you can choose from any of them. You're not limited to choosing one of these traits to choose the dice from. So that first shift spot is really good, but at the same time it's a little risky because you're placing your worker there before you know what dice are going to come out. Now, if you take either this set parent genotype action or the first shift action, whoever gets there first, if there's a coin there, you will take that coin and put it over in next to your player mat. So we've covered setting parent genotype, taking a first shift action, or taking a second shift action. Another thing you can do over here on the left side of the board is to set a research goal. And so there's always 2 placement spots for that. And if you get there first, this will cost you 2 coins. If you get there second, it will cost you 3 coins. And what this is going to allow you to do is immediately take one of your research goal markers and choose one of these phenotypes, either round or wrinkled for seed shape, purple or white for flower color, green or yellow for pod color, or tall or short for plant height, and choose one of those. So if I think I'm going to have a lot of, well, I'm starting out with 2 purple flowered cards, according to how it's set up right now, maybe I put my marker on purple, and this says that at the end of the game, for each fully researched pea plant that has purple flowers, I will get 2 extra points. If I instead chose the recessive trait, in this case white flowers, I would get 3 points for each pea plant that had white flowers that I had that was fully researched. So a nice way to get additional points. Definitely you want to try to do this at some point during the game, set at least 1 research goal, but you do start out with 3 research goal markers, so you can place up to 3 of these throughout the course of the game. All right, that covers the left side of the board as far as actions we can take. Let's come over here, back over here to the right side of the board. The one action that I did not talk about before is the university action. So you can place a marker here and pay 1 coin if you're the first player to do it, or if you're the second player to do it, you can pay 2 coins. And what this allows you to do is to validate any one trait on your pea plants right away. So you would pay your coin, take one of these trait validation markers, and choose one of these traits to validate. Do that. This is a really nice thing to do right before you take, for instance, the gardening action. So if we come over here to the player mat, there are 2 actions that you can take on the player mat. One of them is the gardening action, and one of them is the temporary dice slot. So let's take a look at the gardening action. In the gardening action, you can see the steps that you take here on your player mat. First, you'll draw a card, either 1 card from the nursery or 1 card from the tool shed, and the same rules apply. You can either draw 1 card from the face-up cards, or you can draw up the top of the deck. For the pea plants, for the tool shed, you are limited to the face-up cards that you can see there. The next thing you will do after you've chosen a card is you will harvest any pea plants where all of the traits are fully validated. So let's say all of the traits were covered on this pea plant, I would then be able to harvest that pea plant, and that simply means that I can remove it from my garden plots. I'll put the markers back where they belong and put it somewhere near my board. I'll place it up here, somewhere near my board to signify that I have fully researched that plant, and now I will get the points that are in the top left corner of that card at the end of the game. Once you have harvested any plants out of your garden, you will then plant any cards that you have available to you in reserve, and so now these are ready to be validated during the second phase of the game. And then the last action that you can take is over here for temporary dice slot. What this allows you to do is in that round, in the second phase, you will have an extra space to put one of the dice. So normally you start with 3 dice slots over here. Well, if I had taken this action during the first phase of that round, I would then be able to place a 4th die there. And again, that's temporary. It only lasts for that round. All right, so that takes care of the worker placement phase. Let's take a look at phase 2, is the plant breeding phase, where we're going to take all 20 of these dice. We're going to roll them. So we'll roll all 20 of them, and then we're going to place them according to the Punnett square. So we look at what the parent genotypes were and what offspring we'll get from that. So for instance, a 1 on the die face will get us a big T here. A 4 on the dice face will give us little t. 2s, these are our heterozygotes, our big T, little t. They have 1 of each allele. And then again, 1 is big T, and we'll do that for each of the plant traits. Once the dice have all been rolled and put out, oh, I almost forgot. So if we had rolled, let's say that we had rolled a couple of these de novo mutation symbols, what we would do is we would roll these dice again. So what this represents, and the reason it's, let's see if you can see this, it's showing you a duplicated chromosome during meiosis. You got to reach all the way back to your high school biology to remember these terms. But this is showing you a duplicated chromosome with a little mark on one of those arms, right? That's representing a change in the DNA sequence, and that is going to influence what trait an offspring might have. So we will take any that after we have re-rolled them still show the de novo mutation symbol and put them here in this space right here where we have de novo mutations. So I'm going to roll the rest of these dice and get them laid out. All right, so all the dice are laid out. Here you can see I left this parent genotype marker in place, and that influenced where we place these dice, what genotype they are representing based on the numbers shown on the dice face. So once all the dice have been rolled and they've all been put in their locations, then players will take turns. Let's say that we had a first shift, and let's do a couple of second shifts. Let's say those had been placed during the working phase. So during the plant breeding phase, players will then take turns drafting these dice. Anybody who has a first shift marker will take first, they will have first choice of the dice that are out there. Now this actually shows you where this can be dangerous. So I probably wouldn't have chosen to do this if this was the card I was going for, because notice that for the seed-shaped gene, it has little r, and you can see that with this parent genotype being changed, little r is no longer a possibility. So if that's what I was going for, that would have been a waste of my action. Let's say instead I was going for this big R trait. Let's say that was in my garden. So then I would be able to choose that die. I will take that die, put it in one of my available dice slots, and I will take a trait marker corresponding to the genotype. So in this case, it was big R, and I will cover big R on one of my pea plants. So that takes care of being first with first shift. Then we would come down here to the second shift to see if anybody had placed a marker there during the working phase. So again, I was first in line for the second shift, and you are not actually limited by the number of marker spaces that are here. If players want to place additional markers beyond 5, During the working phase, you would just simply line them out off the board here. But we'll go in order from right to left. So the first person to be able to choose a die would be the one in front here, and that's me. So I come over here and I look at my cards and I see that I need little g, little g. Oh, well, none of those are available. If I wanted to cover up that little g, I could actually get that trait because there is a de novo mutation die in this spot over here. So let's look at that for a moment. You can see underneath the de novo mutation die is this symbol here for the either or, right? So you can either draft this die, it goes into an available dice slot, and you could take a coin, right? Money's hard to come by, so that's not a bad thing to do. Or I could use that de novo mutation if I have an available dice slot to take one of these dice from the same trait. It has to be the same color of dice. So in this case, it's representing pod color. I could take one of these. Maybe I take this big G, because I don't need that. And maybe I want to thwart do a little hate drafting here. I'm going to take this and I'm going to mutate it using that de novo mutation so that now that one is representing little g, and I can cover that trait on my pea plant. So that's how you use the de novo mutations. You can either draft the die and take a coin, or draft the die and take another die and use that de novo mutation to change the face of the die. Now, if you do that, you do have to have 2 slots available for the dice to go into. Once everybody has taken the first shift and then the second shift, now we go, starting with the player with the first player marker, we will draft dice in order as long as players have available dice slots. Once we have completed the plant breeding phase, then we go into the third phase of the round, the research upgrades phase. In the research upgrades phase, you're going to focus your attention up here in the top right of the board, and you have a choice of 4 actions. But first, we do not start with the player with the first player marker. We go in reverse player order. So the person who would normally go last actually gets to go first, and the person with the first player marker will go last. And you take turns purchasing upgrades or hiring assistants. You can do one of these things and then the next person would go. They can do one of those things and the next person would go. There's no limit to how many things you can purchase. You just do it one at a time in turn order. You're limited only by the number of coins that you have. So let's see how this works. One thing you can do is purchase a new plot. That's one of these tiles here. And this would be a permanent upgrade. It would cost you, in this case, 2 coins. You can see the cost of something by looking at where the abacus marker is for that thing, in this case, a new plot, and then looking up at the top of the abacus to the number, indicating the number of coins you pay for that. Once somebody purchases that, so if we had just paid our 2 coins, paid that to the bank, and purchased that new plot, we would move the abacus marker up 1 spot. So the next person to purchase that during this round would pay 3 coins instead of 2. And if somebody else purchased it, that would move up to 4 coins that it would now cost to purchase a new plot. It is maxed out, so if now somebody else purchased a new plot, it doesn't go up beyond 4. Another research upgrade that we can purchase is a dice slot, and this would be a permanent addition next to our player board. We might also choose to purchase an action marker. So if there is an action marker up here in your player color, you can pay the number of coins indicated, in this case 3 coins, and you can add that to your collection of action markers. And finally, you can hire an assistant. And if you do that, you get to choose one of these assistants from the face-up assistants. You cannot draw from the deck. These are really nice to get early in the game because this is, I forgot to mention, a permanent addition, just like everything else in the research upgrades area. This is a permanent addition to your player area. I would have access to that assistant for the rest of the game. So that takes care of the first phase, which is the working phase, the second phase, which is the plant breeding phase, and then the third phase, which is the research upgrades phase. Once all 3 of those phases have been completed, and again, this is in rounds 1 through 4, we'll go through a bit of a cleanup phase where we will remove all the dice from the board and from the player mats. We will take back our action markers. I think I only have 2 of them sitting out here. We leave the parent genotype tiles in place. Those do not get removed. The only way to remove those is by taking that action during the working phase. We will look for any empty coin slots over here and place a coin. Make sure that there's a coin next to each Punnett square. We would discard all of the pea plants in the nursery, and likewise we would discard all of the tools in the tool shed, and we would replace those again according to how many players. So for instance, I'm going to be playing a solo game, so I would put out 3 pea plants and also 3 tools in the tool shed. We come up here to the research upgrades area, and we move down the abacus markers for each of these research upgrades. We move down the abacus marker by 1 spot. We will advance the round tracker by 1 and pass the first player marker. I almost forgot to mention, when you were discarding the nursery cards and discarding the tool cards, you would also discard any assistants, face-up assistants that were there. You discard those and replace them with 3 new assistants. One thing I forgot to mention during the working phase, this does not get replenished until the end of the round when we're doing our cleanup. I think that takes care of our cleanup phase. So we have talked about each of the 3 phases. We do a little cleanup after the 3rd phase if we are in rounds 1 through 4. If we're in round 5, once we have done the plant breeding phase, we would do one final harvest. Now this one here is not fully validated, and so let's talk about how we get points in this game. At the end of the game, you would add up points from your pea plants. You can see the points in the top left there. You would add up points from all your harvested pea plants, your fully researched pea plants. You would then add 1 point for each trait marker that is covering a trait on plants that are still remaining in your garden. So in this case, it would be 2 points. And you would also get 1 point for each unspent coin that you have. On the player mats, you can turn them over, and on the other side of the player mat is this lovely score tracker. And that is how you play Genotype.